All right. Welcome again to Dwell Church. My name is Matt Stefan, part of the leadership team here. And I got to say, singing with you all makes my heart happy. Thank you, truly, for being here today. Each week at Dwell Church, I always think about, it takes 10, 15, 20 people to pull this off. Some people have been planning for their role, training for it, thinking about it for a month. Some people, we just called them today. And they're like, yes, I can do that. It's amazing, you guys, the team that has agreed to I'll build Dwell Church. One of our dreams for Dwell Church is that every person has a job. We have jettisoned the word volunteer. Nobody's just given a little bit here and there or on a one-time basis. Instead, we call them builders. You are building something, and today about 17 people are here building this, and what they are building is not only a place where I like to sing with you, maybe you like to sing too, it's also a place where God dwells, where his presence shows up. And I hope above all else, even if your season at Dwell Church is just one day, just checking it out this one time, that you would feel the presence of Jesus summoning you deeper into life with him. So that's kind of what we're thinking and dreaming about. If it is your first time, stay connected to us. We would love to connect with you. Click that QR code or chat with me after the service. I also want to let you know what's coming around the corner at Dwell Church. And the most exciting part of the service for me is finding out if this clicker is going to work. Let's find out. Probably not. Nothing's happening. Oh, yeah. It's one of those days. Okay, what's coming up that we made a slide for is called Welcome to Dwell. It's a series that we do every once in a while, every 6 months. The dream for you at Welcome to Dwell is to learn everything you could possibly want to know about Dwell Church. We'll give a lot of the backstory. We'll give a lot of the inner workings. It's also what we call conversation-based worship. And so most of the service will actually be us around tables sharing stories about our lives. So you will get to know everything you want to know at Dwell, but you will also get to know some of the amazing people that are here at Dwell. We try to design it in a way informed by my psychologist, highly introverted wife, so that introverts will not suffer the entire time. I promise you that it will be a good time, and I know it'll be a good time because last time we did it, everybody loved it. So what we could use a lot of help with, though, is letting us know. We're going to email you tomorrow. Let us know if you plan to come to at least one of these weeks, because we're trying to make sure people are getting to know all kinds of people in the process. Maybe you do want to sit with the people that you got to know last time, but maybe you don't, and so we're just going to try to keep mixing those tables up. It would be really useful if you could sign up, but I want to make a solemn oath to you. At the end of this, you will know, is Dwell Church a safe place where I could belong? That's the question we're trying to answer for you when we do Welcome to Dwell. Hope you'll come. It is so much fun, and we run a 45-minute service, so if you really hate it, it's not like it's going to be all several hours worth of misery. It's just a little bit. Sign up for Welcome to Dwell. We are also trying to see if the clicker works. No. Okay, let's see what's next here. I have no idea. This is going to be exciting. Okay, we're in the third week of the missing piece. And we are tackling this major problem in our world, that communities of all kinds have suffered in ways that we can all feel but maybe not name. Some have called it a pandemic of loneliness, and we do something every 6 months where we sit around tables, again, kind of discussion-based worship, where we dream together, what is it that God is calling us to tackle or learn about? And those conversations, there's a group project element where each table has to say, if I had 4 weeks of Dwell Church, what would I do with it? And the number one thing from our community discernment in January is we have to talk about loneliness and community. So that's what we've been talking about for the last little bit here. Okay, Kathy, you ready? This is going to be fun. All right, the cue to click to the next slide is me clicking this thing a bunch of times. Okay. The underlying, most important bedrock message of the last 3 weeks is it matters to God that you thrive. That your personal human existence is not unrelated to God's interior world, the story that he is experiencing. That he sees you and desires in a deep way to be your friend. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That was the second week of this series, but we started with this foundational concept. It matters to God that you thrive. And the abundant life that God has planned for you necessitates community, human relationships. That's what we talked about this first week. All right, ready? Here we go. Let's see what's next. Yes, we've been talking about this set of circles. Sociologists use this kind of basic frame to understand what we mean by the word community. Most human communities break down into these three groups. You got your besties right in the middle. That's your core people. Probably they come to name. They might even be the emergency contact on your phone. Best friends. On the outside are affinity groups. This is probably like an online group of people who like to cycle, or in my case, surf, or even play Dungeons and Dragons. I know their first names. I feel like I know them. I never have met them, and I never will. But it is an affinity-based relationship where I really appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate how they comment on my posts and tell me which page my monster I'm trying to build on for Dungeons and Dragons is. There's a meaningful relationship that happens in affinity groups. Interestingly, in our world, we have digitized those two groups. My best buddies live all over the U.S. I text them. I see them every couple of years, but I feel like I could get a hold of them anytime I need to. In my affinity group, as I said, I will never meet them in person. I know them solely in a digital way. We have digitized those two. And in our world, the village element, this middle tier of relationships, has been undermined in a way that we aren't even necessarily able to name who might be in our village. Now, we were looking at some of the research that suggested there are two main reasons why the village has been destroyed in our world. One has to do with the trajectory of technology that you and I have been living through. Cars created suburbs. That meant people had longer ways to walk to know each other. They had to go further distances. The very nature of the cars and highway systems in the U.S. spread out community. Then our televisions drew us from outside in the town square to inside with our room, even if that was in a group. That was still indoors, less connected. Then our televisions went from on the wall in the TV room to in our hand. And so now we're not even necessarily connected to the people in the room with us. And if there's any iconic image of what it is like being a pandemic parent, it is two spouses laying in a bed facing the opposite directions, looking at their devices for 30 or 40 minutes before they fall asleep. That is the world that we have been living in somehow. But the other, I think, is even more impactful. The other cause for the destruction of the village is that we believe a certain set of ideas about what it means to be a human being. That we are individual agents making our own decisions to maximize our happiness. And if we think of ourselves that way, then we will live into the possibility that technology makes possible to live mostly alone. And a lot of us, myself included, have generally done that. That is the set of assumptions we have been handed in our world. Now, that set of assumptions is really unhelpful because, as we saw, my personal favorite study that we've looked at is called the Myth of the Silent Commute. It was a train study where they instructed people to talk to a stranger, longer the better. They filled out a questionnaire of how they felt before and a questionnaire of how they felt after. And even though people thought, this will be miserable to talk to a stranger during my entire commute, the far and away biggest conclusion was, it felt great to talk to somebody. People felt amazing. Their subjective report of how do I feel inside? Do I feel warmer or more hopeful? Do I feel better about my day? All of those things became apparent in this study. But you and I believe firmly that if someone talked to me on an airplane for a few hours, it would be miserable, right? I carry that with me as a core assumption, demonstrated to be false in the research. So these human relationships we are designed for have been sort of undermined by the world that we live in ways that we can feel but maybe not name. The circles have been broken. In week 2, let's see what we got here. Yes, okay, here's one of these researchers. Here's what he said. New societal changes are wreaking havoc on the middle ring of familiar but not intimate relationships with the people who live around us, which we call the village. These are your neighbors, the people in your town. We used to know them well, now we don't. The middle ring is key to social cohesion. Families teach us love, tribes teach us loyalty, but the village teaches us tolerance. And we can feel its absence, right? You can feel that in a way. Okay, I have no idea what the next slide is. Let's find out. Okay, in week 2, we talked about the friend-making God. That deep from God's heart, he is, in fact, a community of love and joy. And so I'm not just telling you that you should get into relationships, but God himself is saying relationships are the coremost thing in the universe. That actually nothing, not even rocks running into each other in space, exist alone. That we are all in some web of relationships. And so when we describe God as the friend-making God, it is that out of an abundance of love in the community that is God, that we sometimes call the Trinity, he has called all of us into being so that we could be friends with him. And there's a theme throughout Scripture of God declaring, this person is my friend, and that person is my friend. And one of the people that is on the list of people listed as God's friend is you. That Jesus says in John chapter 15, I have called you friends, not servants. And you are my friends if you keep my command. And we don't like the conditional nature of that phrasing, you are my friends if you keep my command. But it's wild because the command is to love one another. The friend-making God calls us to love one another. That is what qualifies us as his friend. And so as a preacher, as a church person, as a person who's trying to cast a vision for a bright future for churches, it is wild to me that the problem in the world lines up real specifically with the character of God and real powerfully with the solution he has proposed, that he calls us together. Quite famously in the Gospels, the stories about Jesus. Jesus is gathering. That's a verb associated with what Jesus is up to. And then his enemies are scattering. That constantly the enemies of Jesus are finding people and scattering them so they cannot connect. The enemies of God scatter while Jesus gathers. And so he's gathered us. And this real humble thing that we do every week that takes 15 or 17 people, some of whom volunteered months ago, some just said yes today. They make it possible for us to do the thing that lets us thrive. And today we're going to explore that you and I have to become a certain kind of person that makes community possible. We have to become a community-friendly person. We're going to ask, how do we do that? We've been given instincts that community is going to be too costly and uncomfortable, and I don't want to talk to someone on the airplane. But the calling from what we have been studying from deep in God's heart is that we become people who say yes in deep and costly ways to community, and then we find joy in it. How do we become the kind of people that say yes and find joy in it? Not the kind of people that are like, oh, I'm so glad those plans are canceled. I'm super excited to stay in again with my devices, right? That is the set of assumptions that we can all feel, but maybe not always name. And yet we're called to do something really different. Now, I'm excited about this series. Today we're talking about becoming the kind of person that says yes to community. But I want to pause for a second and name what I think is a flaw in the way we've designed this. If you were here during the community discernment, you know that people stood up and said, we want to talk about loneliness. And as we plotted out, how would we talk meaningfully about that? We thought, it might be uncomfortable for people to say in any open way, yeah, I'm lonely. I do not have nearly enough friends as much as I would like. And we thought it would be a barrier to people thinking about this in their own life. So we switched the nomenclature from loneliness to community, far more benign. But there's a tenderness, a vulnerability that I think we lost. That sometimes it would have been really nice to just go ahead and say, yeah, I am too lonely. Yeah, I do need a lot more people in my life. And as I thought about this mistake that I think we've been making in the way we talk about it, it helped me think about all the times in my life when I did feel like really painfully lonely. And then it helped me think about, how did I navigate those moments in my life? Well, a community-friendly person showed up for me. And that was, in the retelling in my mind of my own life, really one of the only differentiators for me, is that someone else showed up to be in my life. So I moved to Los Angeles in 2005. I was 25 years old. I packed all my belongings in 2 suitcases, and then my dad told me, hey, sometimes on airplanes, if it's too heavy, they charge you more. Did you know that with the suitcase? And I was like, I did not know that. What am I going to do? Because the suitcases weighed more than me. And I hugged my parents and my sister and her husband, and I looked them in the eye, and I couldn't say anything, because I'm like, man, I'm moving away. And I knew that if I said anything, I would just cry there in the airport. 25-year-old man. One goal in life, don't cry in the airport. And I got on an airplane and I moved to Los Angeles. It was a great big adventure and I loved it, and I loved graduate school. And about 9 months later, 2 things happened that I remember quite clearly the same week. I was not always a good student, but my goal in graduate school is to get all A's. That was my goal. And then my 3rd quarter, I got a B+, and I was like, oh, already ruined it. I was miserable. It was really depressing to me, actually. And then something even worse and more embarrassing. I had forgotten to pay our electric bill. And so they had turned off the electricity and gas in my apartment, and my poor roommate and I had to take these cold showers. And if you have ever done this in your life, you know that it isn't just like the day after you miss a bill, they turn it off. It takes months for them to drive out to your house and turn that off. So I had not just one time missed the bill, but a lot of times. And here it had accumulated into 1 week where I was not feeling so good about myself. I had shared with you before how I would go sit in this alleyway behind my apartment then. And I would have these moments with God. And afterwards, I would sometimes not feel so good. That it was hard for me because I had internalized a harsher, angrier God as a child. So when I sat alone with him, it was really hard for me to differentiate the God I was reading about through Jesus and the God I had come to know as a kid. But I had heard this one sermon where a guy had said, one of the gifts you can give to the people around you is to be vulnerable. And I was reflecting on this set of circumstances. And so I'm sitting in the dark apartment where I couldn't have the electricity on or take a hot shower. I was thinking about how much my roommate must feel really miserable having to live with me. And how I'd failed. I got a B+. It was really killing me. And I just sat there and reflected on what hand do I play in this moment? And so I just had this stroke of, I think I'm going to try to choose to be vulnerable. So I had some new neighbors. They were also graduate students with me in seminary. And I just texted these 3 guys, hey, I'm having a really bad week. Would you come over so we could talk about it? And let me tell you what, I was terrified. I was shaking. I'd never done anything like that in my life. Maybe you do that all the time. But for the first time in my life, some people just sat there and listened to me. They showed up for me in a community-friendly way when they didn't have to. They could have said any number of excuses, but they walked over and showed up for me and prayed with me. And it was something I will never forget. That when you choose to be vulnerable with someone, you give them a real gift, opportunity to be a community-friendly Jesus person. And when you faithfully show up for someone else, you're giving them a gift that they may never, ever forget. And so the question before us is, how do we become people who are willing to show up for one another in a world where we have been programmed to do otherwise? All right, more slides. Good luck. Okay, let's skip that one because I already skipped that part. Let's skip this one too. We're way past that. Okay, today we're becoming circle makers. In the circle image, to become a community-friendly person, it is my conviction that you and I are commissioned into the circles where we exist to bring Jesus' transformative presence, to be someone who will say yes to community. And I completely forgot what the next slide is. Let's see. All right, already did the one major flaw. We're doing great, everyone. Okay, here we have dissected this circle diagram because our community exists in 3 circles, but what I want to impress upon you in this moment is that you too also exist in 3 circles. And I want to start in this middle temperament, this middle circle called your temperaments. This is your skills, your proclivities, things you are naturally good at, your core competencies. You're always good at them. Your circumstances, those are real obvious. It's your job, it's your family. You couldn't always maybe control them tomorrow, but over time you could sort of manipulate your circumstances. But they also aren't exactly you. You're a part of them, but they aren't quite you. And what animates your temperaments, your core competencies, your personality, your gifts, your skills, and what influences your circumstances is your heart. What is the truest thing that radiates out of you that you maybe can't know, but the person sitting next to you probably could tell you? This is the thing that you radiate out into the world. This animates everything that you do. This is an interesting concept because Jesus spoke this way too. The Bible tells us in one of these slides, which we're about to discover, Proverbs chapter 4, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Now, we can imagine this to be true, but let's look at a few examples. Let's say you have your temperament, all of your proclivities. Let's see this next one here. You have your proclivities and temperaments and all of your skills, and you have your circumstances, but it is motivated primarily by ambition. That is what is in your heart. Then you're going to make a completely different set of choices given your skills and circumstance. You're going to play your cards a certain way towards a certain end if that is what is in your heart. Let's check out the next one. Still a different motivation animating your entire life. But you can sort of imagine what this person must be like to interact with. If your temperament is given to ask, what's in it for me? Oh, you're going to play a different hand there. You're going to show up differently in your circumstances. And so let's see what this might look like. Here is what God promises to us. See, there's a weird thing. Sometimes we'll talk about the gospel as one day Jesus died for my personal sin so that one day I could go to heaven. And there might be a truth in each of those words. But the truer, I think, more majestic gospel that Jesus was preaching is that his Spirit was coming to us. That God's presence was coming to us. That Jesus removed the obstacles so that I could have the friendship with God that he always dreamed of having with me. One of the ways the Bible talks about is by sending the Spirit of Jesus to reside within us. And the fruit of spending time with Jesus in this friendship sort of way is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. This is but one list of what the character of Jesus might be like. We could add other words to it, including hopeful and humble and courageous. And you could already imagine that these are community words. And you can imagine what that circle must be like, that given your temperament and skills and personality and giftings and proclivities, if they're motivated by love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, humility, and hope and courage, then you will be a very different person wherever you show up, even if it's the same old you. And so the question before us is, how do we become someone that is animated by these things? There's a strange promise in the book of Jeremiah that God says, one day I will give you a new heart. And this is what I have found my conversations with Jesus to be about the most. Is Jesus simply telling me over and over again, what is in your heart? In Psalm 139, the psalmist asks God to search their heart. And this is the most wildly transformative thing that I've ever done, is to real honestly say, God, would you search my heart? And whatever you find in there that doesn't please you, would you replace it with your Spirit? Sometimes we think of being a Christian as doing the right stuff. And there's a truth there. But the broader, I think bigger, more transformative picture of what it means to follow Jesus is that if you spend enough time with him, this kind of stuff will naturally, instinctually flow from you. That it will not be a hard decision to serve someone or to show up for them or to join in on the community. That it will be your instinct. It will become your instinct to be loving and joyful and peaceful and patient and kind and good and faithful. If you spend time with Jesus, if you ask him to search your heart, would you fill me with your Spirit, what you will find is you become like him. And one of the rare, amazing, backwaters words in here is faithfulness. I love that word. Faithfulness means you just keep showing up. How do I become the kind of person that just keeps showing up? How do I become the kind of person that just keeps showing up when something in my heart says, don't show up, that'll be exhausting. And those people are kind of like, meh, don't go. But I've been slowly letting Jesus plant his faithfulness within me so that I have to show up. It becomes natural for me to show up full of peace and joy, to say yes to it. Because God is drawing us together into love with one another. Because the studies show that is what is good for us, and somehow God knew it when the stories about Jesus were about him gathering us. So what I want to do for a moment at the close of the Missing Piece series is pray for each one of us to have a new heart filled with this stuff. Let me pray for you. Oh, Jesus, would you search our hearts? God, would you give us real courage to be real honest with what might be in there? And I'm so grateful that your response to what might be in our hearts is not judgment or condemnation, but it is this stuff that you offer to us, a new heart. So would you enable us by your Spirit to accept that new core animating presence of your Spirit within us, Jesus. Together, each one of us here, Lord, we open our hearts to you. Would you fill us with your Spirit? Would you teach us to love one another? Would you shape us, craft us into your community, Lord, where your Spirit dwells. We love you. Amen.